Crossed paths, the morning mist hung low over the meadow as Nora Santiago knelt beside a young deer, her gentle hands working quickly to remove the wire snare from its leg. At 32, Nora had spent over a decade dedicated to the Willowbrook Wildlife Sanctuary, the small conservation center she'd built from nothing in the rural outskirts of Mapleton County. "There you go, little one," she whispered, watching with satisfaction as the fawn bounded away, disappearing into the tree line of what remained of the Northridge forest. A bittersweet smile crossed her face. Every animal saved was a victory, but the forest was shrinking, another parcel sold to developers just last month. Her phone buzzed. It was Theo, her assistant, and the sanctuary's only other full-time employee. "They're here already," he said, his voice tight with tension. 3 black SUVs and a team in suits. Blackwood himself showed up. Nora's heart sank. Dominic Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries, was notorious for his ruthless business tactics and environmental disregard. His latest project, a luxury resort and golf course, threatened to destroy the remaining forest and the watershed that sustained countless species. "I'll be right there," she said, already walking briskly toward the sanctuary's modest visitor center. By the time Nora arrived, a small crowd had gathered. Local reporters, environmental activists, and curious townspeople formed a semicircle around a tall figure in an impeccable charcoal suit. Dominic Blackwood stood with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to power, his sharp features set in, an expression of cold detachment. At 40, he had built his father's failing construction company into a global real estate empire, earning him both fortune and infamy. "Ms. Santiago," he said, his voice carrying across the space between them. "I was hoping we might speak privately." Nora felt the eyes of everyone upon her. "Whatever you have to say, Mr. Blackwood, you can say it here." A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, quickly replaced by a practiced smile that never reached his steel-gray eyes. "Very well. I understand you've been vocal about my Northridge development." "Your development will destroy critical habitat for dozens of endangered species," Nora replied, crossing her arms. "Not to mention contaminate the water supply for half the county." Dominic adjusted his platinum cufflinks, a gesture Nora would come to recognize as a tell when he was controlling his temper. "Which is why I'm prepared to offer your sanctuary a generous donation of $5 million. In exchange, I'd appreciate your public support for the project." A murmur rippled through the crowd. $5 million would transform the struggling sanctuary, fund research, expand their rehabilitation facilities tenfold. "You think you can buy everything, don't you?" Nora said, her voice quiet but clear. "The land, the animals, people's integrity." Dominic's expression hardened. "I'm offering a solution that benefits everyone." "No, you're offering blood money," Nora shot back. "I don't need a man who thinks everything has a price tag, Mr. Blackwood. Some things aren't for sale, like conscience, or actual concern for something beyond profit margins." The crowd fell silent. Dominic Blackwood was not a man accustomed to rejection, especially not public rejection. His jaw tightened, and for a brief moment, something raw and unexpected flashed in his eyes. "Is that your final answer?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. "It is," Nora replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Unlike you, I can still sleep at night." The cameras flashed as Dominic Blackwood stood perfectly still, the muscle in his jaw working. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back to his waiting vehicle, his team scrambling to follow. Later that evening, as the video of their confrontation went viral, Nora sat alone in her small office, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. The sanctuary was already struggling financially. The East Wing needed repairs, and 3 new orphaned wolf pups had arrived just yesterday. Her phone rang, the sanctuary's veterinarian. "Nora, we have a problem," Dr. Patterson said, his voice grave. "The foundation grant we were counting on. They've declined our application." Nora closed her eyes, feeling the walls closing in. Without that grant, they wouldn't make it through winter. What she couldn't know was that across town, in a penthouse suite, Dominic Blackwood stood at the window, staring out at the distant tree line of Northridge Forest, a glass of untouched, whiskey in his hand, and an old photograph on the desk behind him. A photograph of a smiling young boy holding a falcon, standing beside a woman whose eyes matched his own. Hidden wounds. The rejection stung Dominic Blackwood more than he cared to admit. Not because of the money. $5 million was a rounding error in his quarterly reports, but because of the look in Nora Santiago's eyes. Pure contempt, as if she'd seen through his carefully constructed facade to something rotten beneath. He tossed the financial report aside and swiveled his chair to face the floor-to-ceiling windows of his downtown office. 40 floors up, the world looked orderly, controllable, just how he preferred it. "The board is waiting, Mr. Blackwood," his assistant Eleanor announced from the doorway. Dominic nodded without turning. 2 minutes. When she left, he opened his desk drawer and removed a worn leather journal. Inside was the photograph, himself at 10 years old, holding the peregrine falcon his mother had rehabilitated. One of his last happy memories before the accident that took her life. Before his father had transformed from a distant figure into a cruel one, determined to stamp out what he called weakness in his only son. "Sentimentality is for fools," his father would say. "The world respects only power and wealth." Dominic closed the journal with a snap. 25 years of living by that code had built Blackwood Industries into a titan. It had also left him surrounded by people who wanted something from him, never just him. The boardroom fell silent as he entered. 12 executives waited nervously as Dominic took his seat at the head of the table. "The Northridge project timeline?" he asked without preamble. His chief operating officer cleared his throat. "We've hit a complication. The Santiago woman's viral moment has generated significant backlash. Environmental groups are organizing protests, and 3 of our major investors have expressed concerns about negative publicity." Dominic's expression remained impassive. And, the COO continued nervously, "the county has unexpectedly ordered additional environmental impact studies before approving our final permits. It will delay groundbreaking by at least 6 months. The room tensed, anticipating Dominic's notorious temper. Instead, he merely nodded. "Make it happen, whatever studies they want, and double the proposed green space in the plans." Confusion rippled through the room. This wasn't the Dominic Blackwood they knew, the man who steamrolled opposition and considered compromise a weakness. "Is there anything else?" he asked, already standing. "Sir," ventured the marketing director, "about the Santiago situation, we could apply some pressure. Her sanctuary is in financial trouble. Our sources say they just lost a major grant application." Something cold flickered in Dominic's eyes. "What did I just say about the environmental studies?" "To proceed with them, but—" "Then do so," Dominic cut him off. "The Santiago woman and her sanctuary are no longer your concern. Meeting adjourned." Later that evening, Dominic's private investigator delivered a comprehensive file on Nora Santiago and the Willowbrook Wildlife Sanctuary. He read it alone in his penthouse, learning about the woman who had publicly humiliated him, orphaned at 16, worked 3 jobs to put herself through college, masters in wildlife biology, turned down lucrative positions to establish the sanctuary on land inherited from her grandmother, respected in conservation circles but perpetually underfunded. The recent grant rejection had put the sanctuary in imminent danger of closing. The photographs showed a different Nora than the fierce woman who had confronted him. Nora bottle-feeding a fawn, Nora sleeping on a cot beside an injured wolf, Nora teaching children about habitat conservation. Her eyes in these candid moments held the same passionate intensity he'd faced, but also a profound gentleness. He closed the file and made a phone call. "Richard," he said when his lawyer answered, "I need you to set up an anonymous conservation foundation tonight." Across town, Nora sat cross-legged on the sanctuary infirmary floor, fighting exhaustion as she prepared formula for the orphaned wolf pups. The past week since her confrontation with Blackwood had been brutal. Donations had increased slightly after the viral video, but nowhere near enough to offset the lost grant. "You should go home," Theo said, leaning against the door frame. At 25, he was fiercely dedicated to the sanctuary, but worried constantly about Nora's self-neglect. "Just one more feeding," she insisted, not looking up. "Nora," Theo's voice softened, "we need to talk about the reality here. Without major funding, we'll have to start finding placements for the animals. The sanctuary can't—" "Don't," she cut him off. "Not tonight. Tonight we feed the pups, check on Regina's wing splint, and administer Jasper's medication. Tomorrow we figure out the impossible." After Theo left, Nora curled up on the small cot in the corner of the infirmary, lulled to sleep by the soft breathing of the animals around her. Her dreams were troubled. Faceless developers bulldozing the forest, animals fleeing, and throughout it all, a pair of cold gray eyes watching impassively. The next morning, she was awakened by Theo's excited shout. She rushed outside to find him standing by the mailbox waving an envelope. "It's from the Wilderness Preservation Trust," he exclaimed. "I've never heard of them. But Nora, they're offering us a grant. $300,000, renewable annually." Nora's hands trembled as she read the letter. The Wilderness Preservation Trust. Apparently a new foundation committed to supporting small, independent conservation efforts. The grant came, with minimal strings attached, and would be dispersed immediately. "This can't be real," she whispered, but it was. 3 days later, the funds appeared in the sanctuary's account. That same day, news broke that Blackwood Industries had voluntarily requested additional environmental studies for the North Ridge development and had significantly revised their plans to reduce the ecological footprint. Nora stared at the newspaper. Headline, an inexplicable chill running down her spine. Something didn't add up. First, the mysterious grant. Now, Blackwood's unexpected environmental concern. What she couldn't see was Dominic Blackwood standing at his office window, watching the construction crew dismantling the preliminary work site at Northridge. Beside him lay architectural plans for a completely redesigned development, one that preserved the core forest and watershed. "Your mother would have been proud," came a soft voice from the doorway. Dominic turned to see Eleanor, his assistant of 15, years the only person who knew about his past. "It's just business," he replied flatly. "The environmental approach is gaining favor with luxury consumers." Eleanor smiled sadly. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood. Just business." But as she closed the door, Dominic returned to the window, his reflection staring back at him. A stranger in an expensive suit, wondering when exactly he had become his father. The anonymous benefactor. 3 months after the mysterious grant arrived, Willowbrook Wildlife Sanctuary was transformed. The leaking roofs had been repaired, the East Wing renovated into a state-of-the-art rehabilitation center, and 4 new part-time staff members hired. For the first time since its founding, the sanctuary wasn't on the brink of financial collapse. Nora stood in the newly completed educational pavilion, surrounded by interactive displays designed to teach visitors about local ecosystems. Everything she'd dreamed of but never had the resources to create. "The school buses are confirmed for next week's field trips," Theo said, joining her with a tablet in hand. "And Dr. Patterson wants you to know the surgery on the injured eagle was successful." Nora smiled, but the expression didn't quite reach her eyes. "Have you found anything on the Wilderness Preservation Trust?" Theo sighed. This had become a regular conversation. Still nothing beyond their website and the P.O. box in Delaware. They're legitimate. I've verified that with 3 different charity watchdogs, but unusually private. It doesn't make sense, Nora insisted. No site visits, no progress reports required. What kind of foundation hands out hundreds of thousands of dollars with barely any oversight? The kind we're extremely lucky to have found, Theo replied. Maybe it's time to just be grateful and focus on the work? But Nora couldn't shake her suspicion. In her experience, nothing came without strings attached. The timing was too convenient, right after the Blackwood confrontation and their grant rejection. Later that afternoon, while reviewing supply orders, in her office, Nora received an unexpected visitor. Madeline Foster, the elderly director of the county's historical society and a longtime sanctuary supporter, appeared in her doorway. "This place is looking marvelous," Madeline remarked, glancing around appreciatively. "Your mysterious benefactor has been generous indeed." "How did you know about that?" Nora asked, surprised. Madeline smiled enigmatically. "Small towns have few secrets, dear, and I've been around long enough to recognize patterns." She settled into a chair across from Nora. "I thought you might like to see something interesting." From her handbag, Madeline withdrew a yellowed newspaper clipping dated 30 years earlier. The headline read, "Local Boy Wins Regional Science Fair with Falcon Migration Study." Nora took the clipping, studying the grainy photograph of a serious-looking boy around 11 years old, standing beside a display board covered with maps and falcon silhouettes. The caption identified him as Dominic Blackwood. "I don't understand," Nora said, looking up at Madeline. "Keep reading," the older woman urged. The article described young Dominic's project tracking peregrine falcon recovery in the region, specifically in the Northridge Forest area. He was quoted saying he hoped to become a wildlife biologist like his mother, Catherine Blackwood, the county's first female park ranger. "Catherine Blackwood died the following year," Madeline said softly. "Car accident on the mountain road during a storm. She was responding to reports of injured wildlife after a flash flood." Nora set down the clipping, her mind racing. "But Blackwood Industries has been destroying habitats for decades. If his mother was a conservationist..." Gerald Blackwood, Dominic's father, took control of the boy's life after Catherine died. "Cruel man, by all accounts. Pulled Dominic from his science programs and sent him to business schools instead." Madeline stood to leave. "People are rarely what they first appear to be, Nora, even cold billionaires." After Madeline left, Nora couldn't concentrate on her work. The revelation about Dominic's past nagged at her. On impulse, she drove to the county records office and spent hours researching the Blackwood family and property records. What she discovered stunned her. Blackwood Industries owned the land surrounding the sanctuary, over 500 acres of undeveloped forest. Land that Gerald Blackwood had purchased cheaply decades ago. Land that Dominic had never developed, despite numerous profitable opportunities. On her way back to the sanctuary, Nora took a detour past the Northridge development site. Construction equipment stood idle, and workers were installing what appeared to be a series of wildlife corridors and native plant restoration areas, features not typically associated with luxury developments. That evening, as Nora fed the recovering eagle, her phone rang with an unknown number. "Ms. Santiago, this is Eleanor Vance, Mr. Blackwood's executive assistant. He'd like to meet with you tomorrow regarding some adjustments to the Northridge environmental mitigation plan. Would 2 p.m. at your sanctuary be convenient?" Nora hesitated, her heart racing with suspicion and curiosity. "Yes," she finally said. "I'll be available." After hanging up, she immediately called the county office and requested all documentation on the revised Blackwood development. The plans that arrived in her email an hour later left her speechless. The new design preserved 80% of the forest, created a protected watershed, and established a conservation easement in perpetuity. The next morning, Nora received another surprise. A courier-delivered package containing financial records for the Wilderness Preservation Trust. The anonymous sender had highlighted a paper trail leading back to an offshore account linked to Blackwood Holdings, a subsidiary of Blackwood Industries. By the time the 3 black SUVs pulled up to the sanctuary the following afternoon, Nora was waiting on the porch, arms crossed, the financial records spread on the table beside her. Dominic Blackwood emerged from the middle vehicle, dressed, more casually than their first encounter, charcoal slacks and a navy sweater rather than his signature suit. He approached alone, his security team remaining by the vehicles. "Ms. Santiago," he greeted her, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Blackwood," she replied coolly. "Or should I say, anonymous benefactor?" Something flickered across his face. Surprise, quickly masked. His eyes fell to the financial documents on the table, and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I think we have quite a lot to discuss," Nora said, gesturing to the chair across from hers. Dominic hesitated, then nodded once. "Yes," he agreed, his voice revealing nothing of the turmoil beneath his composed exterior. "I believe we do." Inside the sanctuary, an injured falcon watched them from its enclosure, a peregrine just beginning to heal. Unveiled Truths. "The money was never meant to be traced back to me," Dominic said, his voice controlled as he took the seat across from Nora. He didn't touch the financial documents on the table between them. "Clearly," Nora replied. "What I can't figure out is why. Was it guilt? A PR move, or just another way to control the situation after I embarrassed you?" Dominic's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Nora glimpsed something beneath the cold facade, something raw and unguarded. Then it was gone. "The Northridge development plans," he said, redirecting the conversation. "I've brought the final revisions for your review." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I'm prepared to offer." He placed a folder on the table. "The revised plan preserves the essential watershed and creates a wildlife corridor connecting to your sanctuary. You'll find it addresses your primary concerns." Nora let out an incredulous laugh. 3 months ago, you were ready to bulldoze the entire forest. Now you're personally delivering conservation plans and secretly funding my sanctuary?" She leaned forward. "What game are you playing, Blackwood?" His expression hardened. "This isn't a game. It's a compromise that serves both our interests." "Except you didn't present it as a compromise. You did it in secret." Nora stood, pacing with frustration. "Do you have any idea what it's been like? Working day and night to save this place, then having a mysterious foundation appear out of nowhere? I've been looking over my shoulder for months, waiting for the catch, the trap, whatever angle you were playing." "There is no trap," he said quietly. "Then why the secrecy?" Nora demanded. "Why not just—" She stopped suddenly, noticing Dominic's. Attention had shifted. He was looking past her to the rehabilitation area where the injured peregrine falcon was perched. Without asking permission, he rose and walked toward the enclosure. Nora followed, watching as he approached the bird with unexpected gentleness in his movements. "Female," he noted, studying the falcon's markings. "Juvenile, based on the feather pattern. Wing injury?" Nora nodded, surprised by his knowledge. "Caught in a storm, crashed into a power line. We're not sure if she'll ever fly again." Something in Dominic's expression changed, a softening around the eyes, a tension in his jaw. He stood watching the falcon for a long moment. "My mother rehabilitated a peregrine when I was 10, he finally said, his voice low. "It lived in our backyard aviary for months. I helped with its physical therapy, holding it while she stretched the damaged wing. Everyone said it would never fly again." "Did it?" Nora asked. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Yes, on my 11th birthday. We released it at sunrise on the cliffs above Northridge Forest." He turned to face her. "The same cliffs your friend Madeline Foster told you about yesterday." Nora flushed. You're having me followed? No. Madeline called my office this morning. She and my mother were friends. She thought I should know what she'd shared with you. An awkward silence fell between them. Dominic returned to the table, but remained standing. You asked why the secrecy, he said finally. The truth is undramatic. I didn't want your pride to prevent you from accepting help your sanctuary desperately needed. My pride? Nora repeated incredulously. Yes, your pride, he said with sudden intensity. The same pride that made you reject my offer publicly rather than suggesting alternatives. The same pride that's keeping you suspicious even now, when all evidence shows I've adapted the development to address your concerns. Nora was taken aback by his vehemence. It wasn't pride. It was principle. Call it what you will, Dominic replied, his composure returning. But I recognized it because I possess the same quality in abundance. Nora studied him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not as the cold billionaire, nor as the conservation-minded boy from the newspaper clipping, but as someone caught between those identities. Your mother, she said carefully. She loved this forest. Something vulnerable flickered across his face. She protected it her entire career. And after she died, your father— My father, Dominic interrupted sharply, taught me that sentiment is weakness. That power comes from control, not compassion. His voice grew quieter. By the time I realized the cost of that lesson, I'd already built an empire following his playbook. Nora's anger began to dissolve, replaced by understanding. So the anonymous donation, the revised development, a compromise with myself, he admitted, between what my father built and what my mother loved. Before Nora could respond, Theo burst in, breathless and alarmed. Nora! There's been a fire at the north property line. The wind is pushing it toward the sanctuary. They rushed outside to see smoke rising from the forest edge. Already, staff were mobilizing, moving animals from outdoor enclosures to safety. How bad? Nora asked, heart racing. Bad, Theo replied grimly. Fire department's en route, but with the drought conditions. Without hesitation, Dominic pulled out his phone and began issuing rapid-fire orders. Within minutes, his security team had joined sanctuary staff in evacuation efforts. 20 minutes later, water tankers from Blackwood Industries construction sites arrived, followed by earth-moving equipment to create fire breaks. Nora worked alongside Dominic for hours as the fire threatened to engulf the sanctuary. She watched him direct resources with the same decisive efficiency he presumably used in boardrooms, but with an urgency that revealed how much he cared about the outcome. He worked tirelessly, his expensive clothes ruined by smoke and dirt, helping load animals into transport cages and reinforcing the fire breaks. By nightfall, the fire was contained. The sanctuary had survived largely intact, though the northern forest edge was badly damaged. Exhausted, smoke-stained, and relieved, staff began the process of returning animals to secure enclosures. Nora found Dominic standing alone at the edge of the burned area, staring at the charred trees. Why did you stay? She asked, joining him. You could have made your calls from the safety of your car. Had your people handle it. He turned to her, his usual mask of control stripped away by exhaustion and emotion. In the fading light, she could see clearly the boy who had once loved falcons and forests. Because some things matter more than appearances, he said simply. More than pride, more than being right. Nora nodded slowly, understanding the admission those words contained. Thank you, she said. Not just for today, for the grant, for changing the development plans. Don't thank me yet, he replied, an unexpected intensity in his voice. There's something else you should know. What? The fire wasn't an accident, he said gravely. My security team found evidence of arson. and I have reason to believe it's connected to the original Northridge development. I don't understand, Nora said, alarm rising. Neither do I, entirely. But before my father died, he sold development rights to several investors, powerful people who aren't happy about my changes to the plans. Dominic's expression darkened. People who might see your sanctuary as an obstacle to be removed. As if to punctuate his warning, a distant tree, weakened by fire, crashed to the ground behind them. What happens now? Nora asked quietly. Dominic looked at her, his usual detachment replaced by resolve. Now we stop pretending to be enemies when we want the same thing. In that moment, standing amid the aftermath of destruction, an unlikely alliance was formed, one that would soon be tested far beyond what either of them could imagine. Beyond appearances, dawn broke over Willowbrook Sanctuary, painting the mist-covered meadows in gold. 2 weeks had passed since the fire, and nature was already beginning its slow recovery. Green shoots pushed through blackened earth along the forest edge, life renewing itself with quiet persistence. Nora stood on the observation deck, watching Dominic across the compound as he consulted with the security team he'd assigned to the sanctuary. In the days following the fire, their unlikely partnership had evolved with cautious efficiency. Dominic had arranged for round-the-clock protection while they investigated the arson, and Nora had opened the sanctuary's records to help identify potential threats. The transformation in their relationship still felt surreal. The cold, distant man she'd confronted months ago had revealed layers she never anticipated: strategic brilliance tempered with unexpected compassion, corporate ruthlessness alongside, ecological knowledge that sometimes surpassed her own. "Penny for your thoughts?" Theo asked, joining her with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. Nora accepted one gratefully. "Just wondering how I ended up working with the enemy." "Former enemy?" Theo corrected. "Current? What exactly?" "Allie," Nora said firmly, ignoring Theo's knowing smile. "We have mutual interests." Theo hummed skeptically. Mutual interests that bring him here personally every day when he could just send his team. Before Nora could respond, Dominic approached, his expression serious. Though he'd abandoned formal suits for the sanctuary visits, he still carried himself with the same commanding presence, even in jeans and a charcoal Henley. "We've found something," he said without preamble. "The investors behind the original Northridge development, they're connected to Rivercrest Mining." Nora's blood ran cold. Rivercrest had been trying to access the mineral rights in the region for years, their previous attempts blocked by environmental regulations. The resort was never the real goal, she realized. It was just the foot in the door. Dominic nodded grimly. Once construction began, geological surveys would discover valuable deposits. The resort plans would be modified to accommodate limited extraction. "Your father knew this?" A shadow crossed Dominic's face. "He orchestrated it. The investors paid him handsomely to secure the preliminary approvals before anyone understood what was really at stake." "And now you've disrupted their plans," Nora said, understanding dawning. "The sanctuary fire wasn't about stopping my conservation efforts. It was a warning to you. A reminder of what they could destroy if I don't cooperate." Dominic's jaw tightened. "They've called an emergency shareholders meeting for tomorrow. They'll try to force a vote on the original development plan." "Can they do that?" "I control the majority shares, but they've formed a coalition. If they convince enough minor shareholders..." He left the implications hanging. "What will you do?" Nora asked quietly. Dominic's eyes met hers with unexpected vulnerability. "What would your mother have done?" she asked, taking a risk. For a moment, she thought she'd overstepped. Then his expression softened. "She would have fought," he said simply, "regardless of the odds." That evening, Nora found herself in unfamiliar territory, the penthouse office of Blackwood Industries, surrounded by Dominic's team of lawyers and executives as they prepared for the shareholders' meeting. She felt out of place among the polished corporate professionals, but Dominic had insisted on her presence. "The environmental impact data is your expertise," he'd said. "I need you there." As the strategy session stretched past midnight, most of the team had departed, leaving Nora and Dominic alone amid scattered papers and empty coffee cups. "You should get some rest," she said, noticing the fatigue lining his face. "Tomorrow won't be easy." Dominic leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. 20 years, he said quietly. 20 years building this company in my father's image, becoming exactly what he wanted. And tomorrow I might lose it all. "Would that be so terrible?" Nora asked gently. He looked at her with surprise. "I mean," she continued, "you clearly hate what the company has become. You've been secretly undermining your own projects to protect the environment. Maybe losing control would be freeing." A humorless laugh escaped him. "Freeing? This company is all I have." "That's not true," Nora said, surprising herself with her vehemence. "You have your mother's passion for conservation. You have knowledge and resources that could do remarkable things. You have—" She hesitated, then finished softly. "You have people who see the real you now, not just the cold billionaire." Something shifted in his eyes. A vulnerability she'd glimpsed only in fragments before. "The real me," he repeated. "I'm not sure I know who that is anymore." "I think you do," Nora said. "I think that's why you funded the sanctuary anonymously, why you redesigned Northridge, why you're risking everything tomorrow." In the quiet that followed, they regarded each other across the desk, no longer adversaries. Not quite friends, but something evolving beyond simple alliance. The shareholders' meeting the next day was everything Dominic had predicted. Brutal, contentious, and revealing. The coalition of investors, led by Rivercrest Mining's CEO, presented their case for returning to the original development plan. They questioned Dominic's judgment, his commitment to profit, his very fitness to lead. When Nora's turn came to present the environmental data, whispers echoed through the room. The wildlife conservationist who had publicly rejected Dominic Blackwood now stood beside him, passionately defending his vision for sustainable development. "The revised Northridge plan isn't just environmentally sound," she told the assembled shareholders. "It's economically visionary. Sustainable luxury is the future of high-end development. Mr. Blackwood hasn't abandoned profit. He's positioned this company to lead the market in responsible growth." As the debate intensified, a silver-haired man in the back row stood. Vincent. Powell, Dominic's godfather and his father's oldest friend, held a substantial voting bloc. "I've listened to both sides," he said, his voice carrying authority. "And I find myself wondering what Gerald would do in this situation." The room fell silent, all eyes on the man who had known Dominic's father best. "Gerald Blackwood built this company through sheer force of will," Vincent continued. "He taught his son that sentiment was weakness, that profit was the only true measure of success." He paused, looking directly at Dominic. But Gerald was wrong. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. "I watched Dominic grow from a boy who loved nature into a man who denied that part of himself to please his father. Today I see him finding his own path, honoring his mother's values while building something sustainable." Vincent's gaze swept the room. "I vote my shares with Dominic, not because of sentiment, but because his vision represents the future of this industry." When the final votes were tallied, Dominic had won by a narrow margin. The Rivercrest coalition, defeated but defiant, filed out with thinly veiled threats of legal challenges. In the aftermath, Nora found Dominic standing alone by the boardroom windows looking out at the city skyline. "Congratulations," she said softly. "It's not over," he replied. "They'll regroup, find another approach. But you've won time, and proved that your vision has support." He turned to face her, the usual mask of control completely absent. "I couldn't have done this without you." "Yes, you could have," Nora contradicted. "You just might not have wanted to." A genuine smile, the first she'd ever seen from him, transformed his face. "Perhaps you're right." 6 months later, the Willowbrook Wildlife Sanctuary had doubled in size. The burned forest was regenerating, aided by a restoration project funded by the now public Wilderness Preservation Trust. The Northridge development had broken ground with a design that integrated conservation at every level, a model being studied by sustainable architects worldwide. And on a clear autumn morning, Nora and Dominic stood together on the cliffs above the forest, watching as a rehabilitated peregrine falcon, the one that had captured Dominic's attention months before, tested its healed wings. "Ready?" Nora asked, holding the bird carefully. Dominic nodded, his hand steady beside hers on the falcon's body. Together they released it, watching as it faltered momentarily, then caught an updraft and soared, circling higher until it was just a silhouette against the endless blue. "Your mother would be proud," Nora said quietly. Dominic's hand found hers fingers intertwining. "Of the development? The sanctuary expansion?" "Of the man you've become," she replied. "Someone who found his way back to what matters." He turned to face her, the coldness that had defined him replaced by something warm and genuine. "I spent my life building walls to keep people at a distance, believing vulnerability was weakness. And now?" Nora asked, her heart quickening. "Now I know better," he said simply. "Because love doesn't always need barriers. Sometimes it just needs courage." As the falcon circled back overhead, a free creature returning by choice rather than necessity, Dominic leaned forward and kissed her. Not the cold billionaire of their first encounter, nor the anonymous benefactor of their second, but simply a man who had found his way home. Below them, the forest stretched to the horizon, a tapestry of life adapting and renewing. Just as they had both done, moving beyond first appearances to discover something neither had expected. A connection, forged through conflict, strengthened by understanding, and transformed finally into love.